Welcome to the IpX True North Podcast, where we connect people, processes, and tools. This is episode 15, Unifying Teamwork, Transformation, and Project Management, with IpX's Chief of Transformation, Janeen Henning, and IpX's VP of Services, Brandy Taylor.
Hey, hello everyone out there. I hope all of our listeners are having a really great start to 2022. My name is Brandy Taylor. I am the VP of Services with IpX. And it seems, to have been a really busy year right from the start for most people in my circle. So I think the theme of our podcast today really kind of comes at the right time. So we're going to be talking about career progression, being mindful about taking the time to plan out your personal goals and objectives, and just being intentional about progressing and achieving those. So I think, we all can agree that time just goes by so fast, without intentionality. And sometimes we forget about our own goals and what we want to also achieve in the midst of corporate goals and objectives and other roles and responsibilities that we all have. We're all wearing multiple hats. So without further ado, I am proud to introduce Mrs. Janeen Henning, who has recently decided to join our mission at IpX as our Chief of Transformation. So I'm super excited about this. There's so much to be learned and gained by Janeen and, her career and how she's navigated through this. So I love that you've joined IpX, Janeen, and I get to work alongside you and help our partners achieve their goals. But I have to be honest, and maybe this is a secret, maybe it's not, is I'm totally planning on using you as a mentor along the way. So
No, thank you very much. And I'd be glad. I think we're going to mentor each other through this. That's for sure. You're already mentoring me. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today. So hopefully this is fun for you as well. So
I hope so.
Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and get started. My first question is just an easy one. How would you describe yourself to those who are listening who may have not had the pleasure of working with you? I'm guessing there's probably many that may have worked with you that are chiming in today to get an update from you. But for those who haven't, how would you describe yourself?
Good question. Most would say that I'm probably a typical PM personality. I like to understand the details, be hands-on with the team. I'm good at communicating and collaborating, and I like to have a plan and be able to close things off the list, close those action items. My family would say I'm probably too detailed. I follow up too much. Some of my teammates called me Mother Henning over the years, but I guess those are all PM traits.
Yeah, I've also been called the mom by my engineers in teams in the past. So that's kind of funny how that seems to be a theme for us.
It's a common theme, perhaps.
I think it is. What's funny is that, I don't think I've heard any of our male PM counterparts be called dad, but maybe that's a discussion for another podcast.
Perhaps.
Anyway, I guess I've always taken it as a bit of a compliment, just because for me, what that means for me is I found it somewhat endearing. Is it's not that I'm always not just looking out and delegating, but I'm also taking care of and backing up my team. So for me, that's kind of what the term mom brings for me, I guess.
Yeah. So you're taking care of them and you're engaged. That's a good thing.
I think that the program management skill set is my absolute favorite. So it always resonates really well with me. I think that there's a lot of really great skills that are also life skills in there.
Yes.
So I guess I'll take on the next question here. I guess, when I look at your experience, I hope this doesn't embarrass you. I find it really impressive. Janeen, you have, my gosh, over 25 years of experience, starting at Delphi back in the 80s. You started out as a test engineer and then a buyer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, I guess what I'd love is just tell us a little bit of a story. Talk to me about, what, the ebbs and flows of your experience and how you've navigated your career from the beginning to kind of where you're at today.
Okay. Yeah, I've had a long journey, that's for sure. But I used to call myself highly experienced. But I've been really fortunate to have had those wide variety of opportunities over time that I was given. I believe that working in a wide variety of positions and organizations helps one really understand how work gets done in an organization and it allows you to build up relationships with many different people who you otherwise would likely not get to know, and that you will always value. Those relationships will likely help you at some point in your career. Those people will always be there for you. I've been really blessed to work with some extraordinary people along the way. No words can express how much I value my experiences with them. I do encourage everyone to consider branching out to other roles during your career to get a broader understanding of your internal and external customers, expand your network, and learn from many leadership styles. You learn something, whether good or bad, from each leader along the way that shapes you. And I really encourage people to think about it. Even if you went to school for one thing, think about something similar that you can do that expands your horizons. As far as my history, as you said, I started in test engineering, but I was at a site in Wisconsin that had both avionics and automotive. So I was doing avionics at that time, where cycle time wasn't a concern, but quality was. Low volume, high quality. As I moved into more automotive positions, I quickly learned, though, the importance of cycle time as a cost and throughput factor, thanks to quick feedback from my peers. This was my start of understanding of the importance of requirements. In my avionics test world, nobody spoke of cycle time as something to consider, but rather the focus was on test coverage. But even in that one simple example, it's clear that knowing the expectations and requirements are critical to an employee's success, and as well as to your customer's success over time. So after that time then and purchasing, after purchasing, I went into various roles in manufacturing, including a response team leader role, where this is where I got my first taste of lots of customer interaction, especially when things went wrong. I learned the importance of production readiness activity, part of that planning, that PM, making lists and checklists, doing it right the first time, and how to manage product changes from the floor, which also served me well in my future roles in program management when I moved to Indiana. And then in my program management roles, first when I went into Indiana, I moved from program management into some product line roles over the years. And in my PM roles, my last one was as a global PMO leader. But during that time, I got to work with lots of customers, all regions, many different locations, lots of different products, tons of suppliers, and globally distributed teams, which is always a challenge. I also worked in contract manufacturing, product line portfolio management, transactional lean, operations leadership, which also taught me a lot about manufacturing lean, and systems engineering, which provided me a long and interesting career, but it's been a great journey. So, like I said, lots of time, lots of experiences.
It's again, like I said, it's really impressive, just all of the ebbs and flows of what you've done. I guess my question for you is, when you had changed positions, was that mostly of your own doing, or was that something that you were asked to take new roles?
Yeah, it's a variety. Some things I was pursuing, and other areas were just the company reached out to me because they had a need. So there was a combination of planned progression and company progression over time. And sometimes you're working as a leader, sometimes you're working as an individual, sometimes you're moving up, sometimes you're moving laterally. It wasn't all a perfect plan. I know I've had some leaders who completely planned out their future careers, which is really hard to do with a dynamic environment. But I've had a combination of planned and requested positions.
Yeah, I think that seems like that makes sense to me. So, did you have a destination in mind at some point? Say, hey, I would love at some point in my career to achieve a certain status or place or role in the organization, or even have accomplished certain things.
Um, Probably being in a cross-functional role, and when I started as a test engineer, I didn't even really understand what the role of a project manager was, so it wasn't my end goal, but I knew I wanted to get into something that was cross-functional because I really did enjoy working in the team environment rather than just me and my test console and my piece of hardware. I knew that that wasn't my my end. But as I got more exposed to roles in the organization, then I was able to recognize that these are some things that I wanted to do in the future, and program management was one of them. I didn't have an aspiration personally for a top level. I knew I wanted to be a supervisor, and so you look out maybe 5 years. What do I want to do? As opposed to some people who look out, their 30-year career, what they want to do. But I didn't go that far. Sort of as time went on, I recognized as I got more experience where I was a better fit and where I was more of a natural fit, and then worked to make sure that I was focusing on my skills in those areas in my next steps. Like I said, though, periodically some things were dropped in that weren't anticipated.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it fun, is sometimes those surprise things. And
Yeah,
and I think sometimes over focused on a hardcore plan, it's like it doesn't allow you as much to be open to some of those things that come your way. And so I love that
right.
open-minded sense that you had that just kind of help you lead and drive you to where you want to go and
Yeah.
develop your own skill set. That's awesome. So, one thing that you mentioned is I agree so much with the contacts that you make throughout all of your projects and
Mhm.
your roles. I think, gosh, I swear that sometimes these people are brought into your life for a reason, and even some of the more difficult ones, I guess I find, in every single one of those relationships ends up proving valuable in some way, like you said later, and sometimes that's surprising. So,
Yeah.
so
As
I
you
guess,
said, some of those tough times, one of my assignments was a really tough time, but those team members, we became a family, and we had a war room, and it was an incredible period. And he said, you there's some tough times there, but you rely on the people.
yeah, I agree. I think it's important for, people to be mindful of that today is, sometimes it's not always about being right or, the ways that, some things seem difficult in your current projects and
Mhm.
things, but sometimes making sure you're putting that relationship first because really that's what's most important in the long run of how you accomplish things and support each other and utilize those relationships and experiences,
Yeah,
later on.
absolutely.
So I agreed. So, I guess, you've recently joined the IPX family.
Mhm.
With all of this fantastic experience, I know you could almost do anything at this point. So, what brought you to drive your next steps to come and work with us?
Well, one thing I didn't talk about was a role that I held as a CM2 and supplier change management leader. And it was during that time that I met Joe Anderson, and that sort of closes that loop on how I ended up here and made those connections. But that was one of those roles I didn't pursue. In fact, I was more than a little surprised when they came to me and asked me to take on that challenge. But it was at a tough time in the company, a lot of turmoil, and in an area that at that time that team was struggling. And so I went ahead and said I would take that challenge on and give it a shot. But in those years, I'm so glad I did it because now I can better understand the foundational role that CM2 played after spending time in that position, the hard work behind the scenes to keep the tools, processes, and the discipline in place. And last, really to the importance of making sure you train your new employees because their discipline, their engagement in the process is so important to sustaining that and keeping quality in your products and your documentation. But as a company, we engaged in CM2 after some difficult customer incidents, and we realized we needed some foundational changes to improve our performance. And then, um, not just CM2, when I met Joe, our company was considering an organizational transformation, and Joe and IPX came to discuss their services organization with us. I was intrigued. And after I decided to hang it up from automotive, Joe reached out and shared some of the recent work that IpX was doing, which was moving more into the services. And it sounded interesting. And even though a lot of the things that are required of me now at IpX are a bit different than what I'd gone through in some of my more recent experiences, I'm glad I did it, and I can use some of that experience of numerous organizational transformations that we had gone through and apply that to what I'm doing today. And the other thing I recognized during the time that I was working with our internal organizational transformations is that we had multiple consultants that we used during that time. And I was intrigued by that also during my interactions with them. And I kept thinking, I can do that. But what I'm excited to see for IpX, which is a differentiator, I believed, is that they're a hands-on solutions-oriented company. And I'm feeling that today. Joe kept telling me that, but now I see that. We weren't always excited in my previous roles when consultants came in to help. And we always, the eye roll would occur. But I see the team here getting engaged in the details with the customer, being as hands-on as possible, and doing much of the work ourselves to try to make a difference for our customers. So it's like I said, it's a small world with Joe. And as you said, those long-term relationships sometimes come back, and you hold on to those relationships and end up working together in the future.
Yeah, I love it. I really love some of the things that you said there, and this may sound self-serving, but I don't feel like a quote unquote consultant. It's different than what I've experienced in the past, and I don't like that word. I guess it's fine. I guess I end up feeling like an extension of the team of the people that we work with. We want to become part of their team. We want to roll up our sleeves and help them get stuff done, no matter what that means. And, we could be anything. We could be the bat. We could be a resource. We could just be that external voice that they need to help their quicker than their internal oscillations. And so I think, like you said, it's all about being a good problem solver. And what I love is this perspective for me that's different than when I was in industry, is I see things without that same emotional attachment. When you're in an organization,
oh, for sure,
there's just so much of, well, we can't do this because of that, this, and the other thing, and you have these emotional ties to people, and so that's what I love is I feel like we can come in and see really help see a problem differently, help remove some of those excuses, and help focus and get things done. So
an objective view.
Exactly. And plus it's fun. It's really fun helping people, solve problems, and I like that. So, I guess we talk a lot about CM2 here today. And I think that's kind of what led you, kind of to where you are today as well. And I know you've taken CM2 training and have gotten your certification from over the years. I guess I'd like to just let's revisit that. How did you, in the very beginning, when was the first time you took CM2 training and started to, open your mind to that concept, and why?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned in multiple roles that I had, we had interacted with the CM2 team, but I didn't actually take the formal external training until I started to lead the CM2 and supplier change organizations. We had our own internal training set up for CM2. We had a pretty strong team, and so I had done that, but it wasn't deep enough. And as I led the CM2 team, I knew I needed a deeper understanding. So I got my CM2C certification. And then as a team over the years, we sent a few others to be trained, but we relied on those team members then to do our internal training. My regret is that we didn't capitalize on the newer courses that IpX has to offer over the years. But I've seen the growth in the training offerings and recognize that there's a wealth of knowledge there. So since joining IpX, I've taken a few more courses myself. We've got a new rollout of a new platform, and I'm excited to see that, and then take more courses and do some skill refreshing for myself.
Got it. Yeah, I think for me, my experience was, well, I took the boot camp with Ray a number of years ago back at Washington, D.C. And so you can imagine a 12 days with Mr. Ray.
Yes.
But the company where I was working with was really struggling with change management, and they just come around to feeling that they needed some external support, to make some of those step changes. They had tried to fix things in a number of ways on their own and just really struggled. So that's really where I was able to utilize CM2 and make some really fun and really big improvements. So that's where I drink the Kool-Aid quickly, because it's just based on good program management principles that we like. So.
And the boot camp experience is quite a bit different than doing the multiple, sessions that I ended up doing, but it was good. And we were still doing it face to face then, but did it mostly in Arizona and California back when I took the training.
Yeah, great. So, I think, I'm thinking back, throughout your past 25 years at Delphi Aptiv, you no doubt lived through a large amount of change, and so talk to me a little bit about, maybe just like from a higher standpoint, what are some of the big transformations that really shaped, kind of your overall experience in learning?
Yeah. We had a lot of them, as you said, because I was there long enough. You saw things come and go. We're going to be a regional focus. No, we're going to be a product focus, and those kinds of changes in organizational structure changed multiple times. And in some of those, I was heavily involved and helped coordinate workshops and things like that. And others, I was just part of the large consultation team, but lots of lessons learned going through those organizational transformations. But first of all, listening to the voice of the team members and creating that why we need to change is critical. And sometimes we had done internal surveys first to hear the voice of the team, a broader voice. I mean, some of the mid-level leaders like I was already had their hands raised, identifying some areas where improvement was needed. But you do have to engage the wider organization and hear what people are going through. But then as far as that continuing on that thought process of lessons learned, there's nothing more important in my mind than having the leadership help with walking the talk, communicating the vision once you get that feedback from the team members, working diligently to get the broader team on board and creating that sense of urgency, that common vision, that common need to win in order to succeed. But you do have to recognize when you go through those surveys, you are never going to make everyone happy. You're going to read some tough comments and you're going to get some tough feedback in your live interactions with some of the team members. And you need to listen to those strong words. But again, you have to recognize you'll never make everybody happy. But once you've listened, you've got to acknowledge that feedback and use that in your thought processes, but then get the masses on board with the vision that the team puts together in order to succeed and sustain that organizational transformation. If everyone can see the benefits and can see the big picture, even if their singular issue or a couple of issues aren't optimized, even if they don't see it all going their way, if they see everyone else going on board, and if you get enough momentum going forward, you've got the highest chance to succeed. And then as we went through the transformations, I recommend using a 30, 60, 90-day plan to monitor progress, because it's very easy to slide back into previous behaviors if you don't have something to hold you accountable, and make sure that you're making that progress. And then doing the plan, do, check, act all along the way. And that's where leadership does need to stay engaged, help the organization stay focused, because if leadership isn't engaged, the organization is going to think it was just another one of those initiatives. And if I just close my eyes, it'll just go away. Leave me alone, do my work. It's true. I've had it happen. And you do your best to lay out a great plan and try to get everyone on the same page. But if you don't have that reinforcement, it's really hard to sustain a transformation and maintain a culture change. But that's where I said that plan, do, check, act, listening to course corrections that are necessary along the way, because no one person knows everything. Even after the rollout, doing that 30, 60, 90, collecting feedback, how's it going, touching base with the teams is really important. One thing I really appreciated during one of our early transformations and some time in my lean assignments, we worked with Danaher. They're a company that incorporates other companies successfully. Back when especially when we were studying this, I watched them a little bit today, but not as much as I did then. But we did some cross lessons learned sharing, because they were a conglomerate and they were accustomed to bringing on, 5 companies a year, things like that. At that time that we were talking to them, getting everyone to speak the same language. And I see that in a lot of the companies that we work with, they're being acquired, or they're incorporating lots of different businesses, and they're picking up businesses over time. And we had the same challenge where I came from. It can't be a choice, though, to just continue doing what you're doing unless the company has a strategy for that for some reason. But if you want to get the biggest benefit, you have to find a way that everyone can use the same methods and tools and processes. Otherwise, you've got to sustain so many differences. So at the very least, start with communicating your metrics the same way, whatever it might be. But you'll have to tailor for major differences, because there are differences in products and customers and technologies. But depending on the goal that the company has for when you incorporate another organization or company, commonizing wherever possible, whether it's IT savings or being able to transition people from job to job easily and having a common way of doing work is really beneficial. One other thing I'll mention, I spent time with some learned senseis, some really smart gentlemen in both my ops lean and my transactional lean work, and going through my Six Sigma and problem solving training. I think we need to remember, and our customers need to remember, that you can't change all the variables at once and expect a miracle to occur, and have some idea that you can make this vision occur with changing everything at once and having everyone confused all at the same time. Think, copy, and paste is a phrase that I took away from the time with the senseis. And I think that's something that has stuck with me over the years. And I tried to incorporate that through the other transformations that we did. Think of it like a DOE. As I said, you can't change everything and wonder why when you're running your solder pot, then it doesn't solder when you changed all of your variables at once and you don't know what you did that caused the problem. But the magic of all of these transformations is really in the power of the people and the teamwork. It's just like within program management. No project manager, program manager by themselves can take a product to market. It's the power of the people and the teamwork. You can't underestimate that. And the team has to be engaged. You need lots of good minds working together to get that magical transformation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well said. So many good things there. I mean, I guess for me, one of the biggest things is the people, like you said. It's they make or break everything.
They do.
And that's your culture. And I think that's the most important thing is I think sometimes we think about it from, a technical aspect or, and what's the project? Well, the organizational change management piece or the people side of things and bringing them along for the ride is often, for some of these bigger transformations, the bigger portion of the project, right? Is almost needs its own timeline, its own project to make sure that we're focused on that along the way. So
yeah, it's tough. It is tough because people don't like change, and a lot of people have opinions on what needs to be done, but you've got to listen and take all of those inputs into consideration, and then have that vision and keep them on board with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, at all levels.
Absolutely.
And it's, I guess sometimes I like to think about transformation and I would say bite-sized digestible chunks, and
Yeah.
And I think you and I have talked about this before, but it's really defining what problem you're trying to solve really
Yes.
well, or maybe your top three, but
Yes.
clearly define that,
Yeah.
tackle those, rinse and repeat, like you're saying, copy and paste. And
Yeah.
I think laying out the entire plan is needed. You need to have a vision, but it's not just overwhelming, but it's also impossible to make progress at
Yeah.
times. So,
Right.
setting realistic, achievable, and measurable goals and
Yeah.
objectives, I think, is just really crucial.
Yeah. And don't try to boil the ocean.
Right. And I guess, it's not about just telling people what you're doing. It's engaging them, making them a part of it,
Yeah.
that their voice feels valued. That's the only way to get them from, I guess, a bought off to true adoption, and
Absolutely.
so I think that, gosh, we could spend a lot of time probably talking about some lessons learned there, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure.
So, I guess, for me, I've worked some in automotive, and you've lived there for virtually your whole life. And
Yes.
to me, it's a bit of a unique environment in a lot of ways, due to really focused on that high volume and some very critical timelines.
Mhm.
So I guess from a program management perspective here, how did that shape, your skill set in program management and the tactics that you used?
Yeah, as you acknowledge, the OEM timelines are really unforgiving. They've got their model year, their timing, and they've got so many suppliers pulling everything together, and they're advertising their rollouts and all their marketing. And so you really have to be ready for the vehicle rollout. And they've got extensive considerations for cost, quality, and safety that have to be considered. But I guess my lesson is that starting early and early engagement, even prior to award of business with customer to clarify the requirements, is really important so that both parties really understand what the other interpreted from what they saw of those initial requirements and the statement of work, and what they plan to deliver to meet those requirements that is acceptable to both parties. Um, as we say at IPX, clear, concise, and valid on the requirements part. And so that early customer engagement with the teams and program management prior to award of business to make sure that everyone really understands what we're quoting. And then after award of business, immediately following up with the broader team to make sure that you know what we signed up for. Ensure you're onboarding the new team members because you don't have everybody involved through the quote phase, but then getting everyone on board with what did we sign up for? Here's the requirements. Here's the contract. This is what we agreed to, and ensure also that the team has a clear plan for staffing, funding, and timing, and that all has to be done very early in the project. Even as you're going through negotiations, you're trying to make sure you have all of that lined up because there's no time to waste after an award of business with those timelines typically. But as the organization moves to agile, there's still a misunderstanding that all requirements are not necessary and we're just going to jointly develop this with our customer, but that's not true either. You've got to have some of the requirements solid at the time you quote so that you know what you're quoting, that it's achievable, but the contracts have to be clear and where the boundaries are and which part of the requirements are fixed and which part is variable. And that's all necessary to ensure that you can meet those mainly fixed deadlines because you don't have a whole lot of time for rework, and tooling lead times are long and software is complex. So it's like I said, a very challenging organization or culture to work in, but it does create a lot of discipline and the need for robust program management engagement with the teams to make sure everyone understands the timing and is on the same page, and that you're having your team meetings every week to really make sure that the teams are cross communicating across the enterprise and that they still see the short term and the long term timing.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, it doesn't sound like a very forgiving environment.
No.
So, I think, it takes too long and too many mistakes or costly and timely scope creep experiences for a lot of teams or other, organizations to learn this lesson, So I think your message on clear requirements, I think, is really important. And I know that it's hard. It's hard to do that. Clear requirements and scope definition
Yes.
always drive an efficient and effective
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
A program, a project, I guess, or even down to the individual change level, right? It's just understanding that planning, and it always helps. So planned work, I guess, is always better than reactive work
Oh,
from my
yeah.
experience,
Absolutely.
and faster and cheaper, right? So
Yes. For sure.
always. So we often don't always have time to do it right on the front side, but we always seem to have time to do it twice.
Yes, and actually, when you look at the cost and the stress level that you end up with having to do it over and over again, it's just incredible when you think about the stress on the organization and the cost to redo tooling, redo software, whatever it might be. But I know those initial times are difficult because the customer's got say 20,000 requirements and you have a very small quoting team. How do you make sure you get through those in a way that you get the highlights and get everything that's important? But a lot of times that just means you got to break it up into smaller pieces and distribute it to as many people as you can, you know, so that electricals and software and mechanicals and program management and quality and all of the appropriate parties are looking at their requirements as early as possible and providing that early feedback.
Yeah. Gosh, probably lots of lessons learned and tactics there. We could,
Mm-hmm.
it's down to a science at some point.
Yes.
We're starting to talk a little bit about, change management and things. And I know at IpX, we support organizations in all areas, including change management. And, I guess I like to, I personally see like CM2 with change management and program management having so many similarities. And so, that's based on my experience. And so I'd like to ask you, from your perspective, do you also see similarities or differences there
Yeah.
from your history?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Both. We've been talking about requirements, and that's probably the first similarity. We talk about that, as we mentioned earlier, clear, concise, and valid. One thing that we used to train our people when I was in CM2 is that the change request has to be written so clearly that I used to say even my grandmother could understand it. And that's sort of what you need to think about with requirements, is make sure that what you write and what I receive are equivalent, and that handshake is there. And that's the same for PM and for CM2. That documentation has to be robust. You've got to make sure you understand the internal and external stakeholders clearly and document them, these requirements and the changes, very, very carefully. And I think of each CR and each CN as a small implementation plan, a small project plan that needs to be well monitored and communicated to ensure success and prevent that rework that we discussed about, whether it's validation failures or whatever it might be. And then ultimately that puts risk on the project and the customer. So we even had supplier change project managers engaged, since those details and timing for supplier changes also has a big impact on the organization. And often those went across many different products and many different customers. And so they needed close monitoring and coordination also. And think of the pandemic situation today and how important that is with all of the activity on supplier changes right now. One difference is obviously the customers. And when you're doing CM2, the team interaction is with the internal customers and stakeholders primarily. And then you've got some of the team members who are talking to the external customer because they may be the reason for the change request. And you've got to communicate to the customer what you're doing. But in PM, you're spending more time servicing the external customer and managing all of your wide variety of internal stakeholders also. But that's probably the bigger difference in my mind, is that just for the internal changes, the internal stakeholders are your customers.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good perspective. We're talking about costing here and how important it is to get that right on the front side. And,
Mm-hmm.
to me, I think that's also important with small changes. I think we see change management is often like a necessary evil, or the cost of doing business, or cost of sustaining. And I think, from a portfolio level, with the right level of visibility, change can also be managed and utilized, not just as a cost of doing business or overhead, but also, making sure that you are gaining some profit on that. If we understand all of the activities right on the front side,
Absolutely.
do that proper planning, we can make sure we're costing these things right and making sure that we're getting what the work is worth. And it's important from also the big picture program standpoint, as well as, the small individual change standpoint that we sometimes forget.
Yep, for sure.
Okay. I guess, getting a little bit back to thinking about the new year, often everyone here in January is like new me, new goals, all of that really good stuff that we do in January, but it is the start of a new year. And as someone who's really got great experience in program management, I guess I'd like to ask you, do you take that into your personal life? And how do you suggest that maybe others could organize themselves for a successful year this year?
Yeah, it is a good time to ask that question. And companies typically have just established their company goals. Individuals then create their own goals, or for their family, they may have their own goals. But I think it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day crises and short-term deliverables that my recommendation would be, as a individual, that you put some time on your calendar at whatever those appropriate periodic intervals are, to make sure that you're reflecting and readjusting and setting reminders for yourself to get your other tasks done, things that aren't just day-to-day crises, but look forward, look up, see the forest through the trees, those types of phrases, and make sure that you do, whether it's every 2 weeks or once a month or however long, to make sure that your other longer term goals are being met, whether they're personal or professional, and make sure that you're hitting those. Also realign with your leadership if necessary. If your leadership had gave you 4 critical things to get done, but then the crisis is day to day on this one thing, you just make sure that you guys are talking about how do we adjust and where do we need to get some help to make sure that all of our priorities are being managed. But putting it on your calendar as a formal reminder, whether it's the little steps like your time, your tasks, whatever it might be, or just a reflection, spend a moment, just think of the Franklin Planner days for those of you who are older, spend that daily time, weekly time, monthly time to make sure that you're considering short-term and long-term goals.
Yeah, I love that. I like to think about it like scheduling yourself as you would take a meeting, with a client, for example, or, a work meeting is making sure you actually treat yourself in that same fashion. So
Yep, for sure.
I guess with the pandemic, it often feels like the past couple years have simply just disappeared. And it's hard to believe that 2019 was already 3 years ago. And I guess with this message today, I guess I just encourage everyone to find time to think bigger, and intentionality, I think, is key there.
Yeah, for sure.
Take care of yourself. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Janeen, thank you so much for taking this time and sharing.
Thanks for the conversation today.
I loved it. I think it was really fun. Would it be, I guess, from a listener's perspective, if someone was interested in, any questions regarding what we talked about today, or just want to speak with you about maybe how you could support them in their goals and objectives now that you're part of our family, how would they be able to reach you?
They can find me on LinkedIn or email me at janeen@IpXHQ.com.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks, Janeen. Look forward to working with you here, and appreciate the time today.
Yep, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe and review the show. And for more information on IpX, visit IpXHQ.com.